Hello, and welcome to Markets in Focus. My name is Joe Bell, and today I'm going to walk you through some of the most interesting financial market themes that I'm observing. There is a lot going on in the markets right now and developments around the US-Iran conflict. We've received a 2-week ceasefire that has caused a significant buying surge in equities and also a significant downturn in oil prices. Also, when we look back historically, this is not the first time that we have experienced geopolitical oil shocks, and historically, they do not cause lasting damage to the stock market. And finally, sentiment has reached extreme bearish levels that we have only observed a handful of times throughout history. Let's take a look back at what has happened when we've experienced these in the past. Now, over the past week, there was a rise in fear up through Tuesday night as we were nearing in on the 8 p.m. potential deadline of the 2-week pause that was put in place by President Donald Trump. There was last minute posturing, Truth Social posts that were very alarming to many people. But what ultimately happened was about 90 minutes before that 8 p.m. deadline, President Donald Trump put out a Truth Social post basically saying, working alongside the leadership from Pakistan, along with the Iranian counterparts, they had reached a 2-week ceasefire, 10-point potential agreement in faith in a potential agreement, a negotiating framework, is I believe the way he phrased it. And Iran shortly thereafter put out something basically confirming that. We saw futures jump up about 2.5% overnight for the S&P 500. We have seen a continuation of that rally with the S&P 500 increasing by more than 7%. If you take a look at this chart, the Brent crude oil spiked from from trough to peak 63%. From that February 28th, that was when US attacked Iran over the weekend, up through the peak where it was around $120 per barrel. And during that time period, the S&P 500 had declined around 5%, peak to trough around 8 or 9% for the year. But we've seen a big rally. Oil prices have rolled over. Today, this is Friday today, JD Vance, along with Witkoff and Kushner, are supposed to meet with their Iranian counterparts in Pakistan to continue sort of the negotiations of this framework. There's been a lot of uncertainty around the ceasefires. Iran has put out information around the ceasefires not being upheld. Obviously, Israel at 6 a.m. the night after, or the morning after this potential ceasefire was put in place, attacked Beirut, Lebanon, with a significant amount of military power, and there were a lot of injuries and deaths there. So that created a lot of confusion. So the ceasefire, the market is really pricing in that this is not going to escalate back the way it was, and we will continue to see some sort of a de-escalation in this. And there are certainly signs of steps toward that. But right now, there remains uncertainty around that agreement as negotiations are still undergoing. Now, when we look back, this is not the first time that we've experienced geopolitical oil shocks. If you look on the page here, these are all of the different, mostly Middle Eastern related, and then you have the Russia-Ukraine war there at the bottom as well. The Yom Kippur War back in the 1970s when Egypt and Syria invaded Israel on the Yom Kippur holiday. There was a 3-week war that caused really one of the largest oil shocks in history, up 360 or 380%. The Iranian Revolution, which that is notable because the former leader, the Shah, was overthrown by the Islamic Republic, which is the same regime that's been in power up through the attack on February 28th to the leader, the supreme leader of that group. And you had the 2 Iraq wars in 90 and 2003, the Arab Spring, where you had this uprising of protest in Gulf states, and along with the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022. And around these events, oftentimes leading up to these events, you actually saw significant increases in oil prices. And S&P 500 was volatile, certainly underperformed, but on average only down about 1%. So the markets are typically impacted by this, especially inflation and interest rates, and sometimes the stock market. But once oil peaks, when you look at the 3 and 12-month returns, the stock market tends to be pretty resilient and tends to revert back to the underlying economic fundamentals and where we are at in the business cycle. At least historically speaking, these oil shocks tend to be short-lived and don't have a lasting impact on the stock market once the conflict de-escalates and we return back to some normalcy at some point. Now, when you are tracking sentiment, which is really how bearish or bullish overall market participants are, it has been extremely fascinating, not surprising, but fascinating how bearish and how quickly people have become. Take a look at these various different sentiment indicators. We have retail survey sentiment, newsletter sentiment, that's market forecasters that are saying they're bullish or bearish. And we're also tracking put to call options activity. Are people hedging a lot in the options market for downside, or are they very complacent? And when you look at these stats, it's pretty clear. These are percentiles relative to each of their respective histories. And so, for example, retail sentiment survey is more bearish than 87% of the data point readings in that data point's history. At the most extreme level, look at that options activity put to call ratio volume at 98%. So that's more bearish than 98% of the readings over the past 26 years. And so we have multiple different types of indicators that are all reading extreme fear and bearishness. Now, Warren Buffett has a famous saying where he says, be greedy and what most are fearful. And people are very, very fearful right now because of the uncertainty around this conflict. But take a look at the handful of times in history that we have experienced similar panic levels from these three groups of sentiment indicators. You can see Iran war here the first week of April right there. We don't know what the forward returns will be for that. But when you look at tariffs back in April 2025, tariff turmoil, that was one day after the market bottom. You had the COVID pandemic in March of 2020. That was a couple of weeks before the market bottom there in 2020 bear market. Eurozone debt crisis in May of 2012, and the US credit rating downgrade in August of 2011. So we are in rare territory in terms of these extreme negative sentiment readings that I just talked about. And what's interesting is when you look back historically, when we reach those levels of panic and despair, it's actually a contrarian signal for the stock market. And the forward S&P 3 and 12-month returns are really, really good. You can see it on the chart there. The average 3-month return is 14%. The average 12-month return is 39%. So small sample size, rare territory, but historically, this level of extreme bearish sentiment means above average forward returns for the stock market. Now, all of this talk about the Iran-US conflict, the US-Israel-Iran conflict, it is rightfully getting a lot of attention. But when you look at something else that happened here, the Artemis 2 mission from NASA launched, interestingly enough, actually just a couple hours before the address by President Trump with Iran a little over a week ago. And this was notable because this is the second of a three-step process for a return to the moon for the first time since the 1972 Apollo mission. That's the first time we've put someone in lunar orbit around the moon in 50 years. So it's pretty important. This will mark this mission the first time in humanity's return to over 50 years, as I said. And so they took off about a week or so ago. It took them about 5 or 6 days to get to the moon. They successfully entered the orbit of the moon and went around the dark side, came back around. And today, Friday, April 10th, is the expected landing back into the Earth's atmosphere. They're expected to land in the ocean near San Diego, California, around 7:53 p.m. Eastern time. So hopefully everything goes well. They return safely, and that's a big accomplishment for NASA, for the country, and for humanity. And the next step is going to be Artemis 3, where they will actually send that same mission with a team of astronauts to land on the moon for the first time since that 1972 mission. So a lot of conflict, a lot of fear, but a pretty big accomplishment for that group. So that's exciting for space travel and exploration. So I'm excited to see them arrive safely and then the next mission successfully. With that, I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.